Good afternoon. Srija Nair. On behalf of Yardstick, it's my pleasure to welcome you all to attend Promoting Inquiry, SEL, Social and Emotional Learning, Student Wellbeing and Success through STEM Stimulation Workshop. Let me introduce today's speaker. Ms. Suzanne Saraya is the Canadian Director for Explore Learning, a math and science online educational products provider for the K-12 market based out of Virginia, USA. Although Susan's educational background is in astrophysics, she has been involved with international markets from the beginning of her career in Canada, when she joined International Publishing and Development. She has worked with various governments in North Africa and South America to support their global presence and is now a frequent speaker at Canadian and international educational conferences. Prior to joining Explore Learning in 2015, she served for 5 years on the board of trustees for the International School of Charlottesville, a trilingual school in Virginia, USA. Would request Ms. Susan to start the workshop. Hello, am I audible?
Good morning, good afternoon. Thank you so much for this introduction. I hope everyone can hear me well. If you can just let me know. I know that Srija's voice was breaking. I'd like to first start by saying thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this presentation. For those of you who I've met, I've recognized some names. I know I've spoken to some of you before. Otherwise, my name is Suzanne Sarah. I'm with Explore Learning. And we'll spend the next hour working together discussing this idea of what is SEL, student well-being, how to help that your students succeed based on these ideas of using STEM simulations. So I'm going to start by sharing my screen, and we're going to get started with the presentation. So as I said, first and foremost, I'd like to thank Yardstick for organizing this event. We are going to run this presentation as a discussion. That's my goal. If you could please participate, give your ideas, give your opinion. This is a conversation. And we hope to learn from you as well as sharing our ideas with you. There are a number of Yardstick representatives as well on the line, so feel free to ask questions and we'll have them answer to you as quickly as we can, and they can interrupt me if the question requires me to stop and give you an answer right away. We're also going to be throwing some polls out there so that we can get your feedback, but please again use the chat box to ask any questions that you may have. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to stop my camera and I'm going to share with you the screen, and we're going to get started. We'll get back with the camera on later on should you have any questions towards the end of the presentation. So again, welcome for those who just joined us. Today's session is going to be about promoting inquiry, SEL, student well-being and success through STEM simulations. Here's what we're going to cover during the day. And again, please let me know that you're all seeing my screen. We are going to be today looking at reflecting on the last 2 years. Then we're going to talk about what is SEL, trying to define SEL and student well-being. Then we're going to delve into what is inquiry-based STEM. And then I'm going to give you some examples of how simulations called gizmos can support your inquiry, STEM, and SEL. And again, at the end, we'll take more questions if you want to keep them till there. So as we start, let's start by talking about how did the last 2 years since March 2020 have changed? How have it been? Again, please add your chats in here in the chat box. We want to have this to be a conversation, right? So before we get started, maybe for those of you who would like to share some ideas, let's start with the first poll. And I'm going to ask my colleagues here to just throw the first out there. Are you able to send the first poll out there?
Yeah, Susan, just a minute. We are just doing it.
Mhm. And while they do that, yeah, Ed? So we want to hear what are some of the major changes in pedagogical approaches that you have seen in your schools due to COVID. So please go ahead and respond if you've made any of these changes or if it's something else, of course. Um, Please go ahead. We're going to leave this poll on for another 10 seconds, 15 seconds. We'll leave it on for a few more seconds. And thank you all for answering those questions so quickly. This is just a kind of a warm-up questions to get started. I think we just want to give an idea. So again, let's give it 5 more seconds and then we'll close the poll. We just want to get a general idea of what you think you have done. All right. If you want to just close the poll at this point. We're just going to give you a general idea of the results just so you can see. I'm sharing those results. I hope you can see them. And what we notice is a lot of you have spent a lot of your investment on online solutions for flexible learning and in investment teacher training, as well as in solutions to communicate more effectively with the parents. And I think that's very general to everything we see around the world. I've been working with different regions. We work with about 80 countries. It's the same everywhere. We've had to make some changes and we've had to make some investment to answer to the situation that we've seen in the last couple of years. So let's now jump in and give you kind of an overview of what. And although it is impossible today to say how long, what is the long-term impact of the global pandemic will have as an impact on the economy of countries, human health, society, and definitely on education, we know there have been many changes. I mean, think about it. At one point in the world, 1.6 billion students were outside of they're gone out of the classrooms. They were learning from home. And I have to say that it was educators like you that have made it possible for learning to continue. It is with your ability, your hard work, your tenacity that you have made it possible for us to continue with educating youth. And we did see is that this pandemic has put the spotlight on the critical nature of schools and education and the importance and the value of teacher, but as well as a necessity to educational systems. And what we've seen is that schools have the opportunity now, after COVID, to recalibrate a little bit the way they think, review their strategies, identify maybe pre-existing gaps that existed even prior to COVID. And now they're adopting innovative solutions that are going to improve their curricula. So overall, what we've seen is that students and teachers, as well as parents, really have become much more comfortable with technology. You can all agree with me on that, right? Your teachers' digital skills in particular have been enhanced, allowing them to be a lot more efficient in their classrooms. We also saw much better collaboration between educators as teachers help each other and learn from each other. And we've also noticed a much better communication with parents being implemented. We had no choice. And the other piece that I think is really important is that instructional material had to change and had to be more flexible, more differentiated, more inclusive, and definitely more engaging. Um, Engagement is not learning, but engagement is the first step in learning. And I think that we've seen edtech solutions being implemented that have made definitely possible for teachers to be much more and students to be much more engaging material. And we noticed that in this new material that we're bringing in had to support one area in particular, which was growth mindset. and bring in varied approaches to learning. We know that students online learn slightly differently than in the classroom. We've had to come up with solutions to make students feel more empowered and take more control of their education, become a lot more independent, and develop a lot more skills rather than just content. And this is reflected, for example, in the new CBSE curriculum that we see promoted right now, where it is much more focused on those skills. And students' well-being became really a major topics, one of the topics of most importance for educators and parents. And this is because we've seen the impact of COVID on our students and on our teachers as well. So let's go in and now talk a little bit about this topic of student well-being. And we talk a lot also, we heard a lot about the term social emotional learning. So before we go in and talk about social emotional learning, I'm going to throw a second poll out there. And I'm going to ask you to send a note about social emotional learning. I want to get to know how important is student well-being in SEL become for your school? Is it something that you've embraced? Is it something that you've worked with, or not at all? So I will ask the team to please put in the second. Very quickly, we're going to put a few minutes, the poll around what is social, how have you, how important was social emotional, or is today social emotional learning for you? And while they do that, we're going to talk about the definition of what emotional learning, a word that you will see and hear. If you haven't heard about it a lot already, you will hear a lot more about it in the future. There is a group called CASTLE, the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning, also that has revised the definition of SEL lately. It is the process through which young people and adults acquire and apply knowledge, skills, and attitude, manage emotions, and achieve personal and collective goals, feel and show empathy for others, establish and maintain supportive relationships, and make responsible and caring decisions. It's a very long definition, but it really covers it all. And as you can see from the poll, I'm just going to end it and share the results right now. For all of you here, it's either very important or important, so very high up on the goal of your schools to really implement social emotional learning. And it covers all of those areas of applying knowledge, skills, and managing your the students' attitudes and emotions to achieve personal and collective goals, very important. And maintain and develop supporting relationships and make caring decisions. And that is, in a few words, from CASTLE, this organization that I would highly recommend you look up what they have to say around social emotional learning. There are lots of resources out there. All right. So let's delve a little bit deeper into this and kind of break it down in a way that we can really focus on it. What are some of the core competencies of SEL, of social emotional learning? And there are really 5 of them. The first one is self-awareness. The second one is self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, and responsible decision-making. So why is SEL, do you think, more important today than ever before? Well, interestingly enough, there was a recent survey of 3,300 students between the ages of 13 and 19. And that survey showed that more than 1 in 4 adolescents had increased feelings of worry, unhappiness, stress, depression, loss of confidence, insomnia, and more than half of the teenagers were more anxious than usual about their current and future educations, their grades, accessing university, higher education, admission. And A large percentage of the students said that adults at their schools did not provide helpful resources at the beginning of the pandemic. So now we're here, we're at the other end, hopefully, and we hope that everyone is healthy. And now we have to deal with the side effects, another effect of the pandemic, which is this social emotional learning of our students, right? There have been educators have been also queried in over 16 countries. And what they found is that 80% of them believe that positive emotions in our students are critical to academic success. And emotional being is crucial for developing foundational literacies. So not only are we saying that it's important for the students feel a little more anxious, feel like a little bit more worried about their future than they had before, but we're seeing that this also affects the results of the students' academic success. So this was a poll developed by The Economist, which is one of a large newspaper in the US. And this was conducted across the globe from teachers from around the world, from Canada to Sweden to Indonesia to the US, everywhere. And they really showed that we have to address this area because 70% of students' emotional well-being has grown more important since they started their careers for those teachers years ago. And also emotional well-being is linked to how you develop your communication skills. So now we're touching on another area that's very important, one of the four of the 21st century, four main skills we need to develop in our students: creativity, critical thinking, collaboration, and communication skills. So the point where we're seeing that if we address our students' social emotional learning, we're not only affecting their well, but we're also helping them succeed academically and develop skills like communication skills, collaboration skills that are going to be crucial for them to succeed as a global individual. All right. So basically what we see that SEL brings in many advantages, many benefits to well-being. And when we're talking about this, we want to talk about what are some of these skills. So we're talking about resilience. Think about how students are resilient and think about how that would affect them, their learning skills. Self-compassion, confidence, adaptability, thoughtfulness, independence, social esteem, empathy, student agency, and desire to positively impact. So when you think about these ideas, these constructs, we're looking at them, we realize that these are critical things that can create for happier, healthier students, but in the same time are going to support our students' success. And you're going to think about how students' resilience can help them succeed, self-compassion, confidence, and keep those ideas in mind as when I'll go back to them afterwards, when we start thinking about math and science and STEM activities, and how can those support your students and how they can bring in and help also support your social emotional learning in your students. All right, that's where we're going to jump in next. We're going to talk about what is inquiry-based teaching and define the word STEM, because again, I'm sure you've heard it 100 times, and we need to kind of define it again to make sure we're talking about the correct thing. I'd like to start by talking about inquiry. What is inquiry? We talk a lot about scientific inquiry, correct? Which is the process which scientists go through to answer a research question. This is when they're collecting data, they're analyzing it, they're reaching and communicating conclusions. And then there is inquiry teaching, which is basically an instruction that allows students the opportunity to answer research questions, right? And to answer those questions exactly like a scientist would, where we would start from data collection, then we would move to data, creating hypotheses, and then creating this data analysis and interpretation of the information that we've collected. So we ask questions, we investigate them, we create some hypotheses, we discuss them, and then we reflect back on them. So really we're in constant questioning, and that's the idea behind inquiry. We're finding out and we're reaching solutions and we're interpreting this data to understand the phenomena that we're studying. Why is it so important though? Is it important to teach in an inquiry method? Well, it's been proven that if you are using an inquiry teaching method, what you're doing is you're helping your students develop skills in problem solving and critical thinking. Once again, we're hitting on one of the main four skills that are very important for 21st century learning: critical thinking and problem solving. And when you're doing inquiry teaching, what you're doing is you're helping students learn by being directly involved with the material. Because of course, what you're doing is you're studying a real world phenomena when you're doing inquiry teaching. You're helping students recognize patterns, apply knowledge to a wide variety of situations, and then make independent decisions based on the knowledge of the subject. It also supports conceptual understanding. So you're not only doing hands-on, you're doing the conceptual understanding in the same time as working on the hands-on. And you're preparing the next generation of innovators, because this is how you develop students' interest when it comes to science and math. So clearly a very important piece is to develop inquiry teaching in your schools and developing STEM. So when we talk about STEM is based on the idea of educating students in 4 specific disciplines: science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, and doing so in an interdisciplinary and applied approach. So rather than teaching the 4 disciplines as separate and discrete subjects, what STEM does is it integrates them in a cohesive learning paradigm based on real world applications. In the 21st century, scientific and technological innovations have really become increasingly important as we face the benefits and challenges of both globalization and a knowledge-based economy. So to succeed in this new information-based and highly technological society, students need to develop STEM capabilities at much deeper levels than was ever acceptable in the past. So taking this integrated approach to teaching serves all STEM learners, and I'm saying, when I say all, I'm saying all learners of different methods and different abilities along the continuum, and allow students to really reach out and have access to learning based also on their interests. And the other piece that is really interesting with STEM is that you need to start early. Because students in the early grades are really natural scientists, it is essential to introduce them to STEM very early on and keep them interested in those fields and engaged in those fields. If we wait too late, if we wait to a later grade, students begin to fall behind. So what we know about STEM is that STEM is essential for all learners. And we have to start thinking about STEM as a non-negotiable in the way we teach with it. So before I go any further, I want to ask if there are any, I want to stop here and ask if there are any questions, if you'd like to add any comments. Otherwise, we're going to start developing now, thinking about STEM and the benefits of STEM in terms of education. So when we talked about the importance of social emotional learnings, we talked about how important it is to have inquiry teaching in your school. Let's talk about why bringing in STEM in the mix is going to benefit your students in a major way. Of course, we talk always about hard skills and soft skills, right? But let's talk about what kind of skills in general it's going to help develop in your students. So one of the biggest things it's going to do is going to foster ingenuity and creativity. STEM is going to support students and lead them into new ideas and new innovations, new ways of looking at a problem. It's going to build resilience. And now we go back to our constructs we're talking about earlier. If we know that social emotional learning, part of it is building resilience, it looks like if we have a STEM education in our schools with inquiry teaching in it, we're going to be able to support and build further more on this resilience, because this is when we're going to stress the value of failure in exercise. We're going to also allow students to enable and embrace mistakes as part of the process. I have found lately in all of my travels that students are very afraid of making an error, making a mistake. And building this resilience, allowing them to feel comfortable with making a mistake, not because it doesn't matter, but because failure is really a learning exercise and we need to embrace it in order to allow students to go past it. Otherwise, none of the major discoveries in the world will have happened because none of us can come up with a solution right away. Otherwise, it would be over by now, right? It also teaches students to problem solve and to do so through experimentations. So students are going to be able to develop habits that prepare them for the collaborative workplace of the future by solving authentic problems together. And be it in small or large groups, we're going to develop this experimentation and we're going to develop teamwork as well. And this teamwork is going to be necessary to be able to be a solution problem, like how to problem solve. Because students who engage in STEM, they learn how to examine problems and create a plan to solve them and hone in their critical thinking skills and learn how to do so in a group. Today, no solutions are out there, no problems are solved by one individual. It's usually groups of individuals, and we have to learn how to do it. We also want to encourage them to learn how to apply knowledge and transfer knowledge from something that they've learned before to a new situation, but doing so in a real world environment. And of course, we want to encourage tech use. That's, of course, very important. And we want to help students adapt to new situations and transfer their knowledge to new, never seen before situations. So thinking of that, of those ideas, let's go back to that slide that we have had before. Resilience, self-compassion, confidence, adaptability, thoughtfulness, etc. You can see a direct link between how we teach with STEM and what STEM brings us and developing the social emotional learning in our students. The links are fairly clear. So how can we do that? Like, how can you do that in your school now? How can I bring in STEM? How can I bring in inquiry teaching? How can I bring in SEL as well? And make sure that I'm supporting student social emotional learning. But before we do that, how effective do you think STEM would be to support SEL and well-being in your school based on what we just said right now? If you can throw our third poll out, what we're going to ask you is just to say, based on what we just discussed so far, how effective do you think STEM would be to support SEL and well-being in your school? So team, if you want to throw that poll. Thank you so much. I could give everybody another 10 seconds and then we just want to get an idea of what you think. Very good. Thank you so much. Again, thank you for those who are participating. It really helps us better understand what you're looking for and what you're thinking. As there are so many of us, it's hard always to have a conversation directly, but we're hoping that this is a way for us to have this conversation. All right, so I'm going to end the poll and share it to you. So of course, we agree that we are going to be able to be much more effective using SEL and using STEM to support SEL. Well, let's delve deeper. Um, how can we approach this situation? What are the solutions? So ideally, what you want to use is a solution that's going to be like ours, the one we're going to present to you today, solutions that's going to support hands-on and experiential learning with rich virtual inquiry and using interactive simulations. It's going to build STEM in 21st century. It's going to create inclusive classrooms with differentiations for all learners. It's going to support growth mindset and student well-being. And of course, it's going to include robust professional development for your teachers. Some of you said that you have invested quite a bit in it in the beginning. And so what it would look like, it would have some kind of a solution like this that takes into consideration, of course, the cognitive learning levels of our students. And this is what at Explore Learning we do. We focus very much on cognitive learning levels because our instructional strategies are curated to be aligned with student interest and needs while preparing them to reach their full potential. So when we're talking cognitive learning levels, we're talking about that there are 3 of them. And we start off with surface learning. Surface learning is really in the elementary realm, where we've got students who are exploring science concept and skills through precise approaches. And this is going to give way down the road to deeper exploration of scientific inquiry. And then we move into the second part, which is deep learning. This is when students engage with data and evidence and uncover relationships between concepts. This is when students start thinking metacognitively and use knowledge to plan, to investigate, and articulate those the scientific generalizations before. And then finally, in a high school, this is when we move into what we call transfer learning. This is when students apply knowledge of scientific principles, processes, and relationship to a brand new context. And they're able to discern and innovate to solve complex problems. So you can't really jump into deep learning. You have to transition there from surface learning to be set for success. And I'm going to give you an example today of what we've been talking about with one of our programs called Gizmos. And what we will do is I'm going to start now bringing into the screen this example of a program called Gizmos. Gizmos are online simulations. What they do is that they are set up in a way that they support not only science and math, but they also allow to develop skills and processes. And they're set up for grades 3 to 12. And what I'm going to show you today is how you can use them. When you think about it, why gizmos? We're going to go back to that slide in just a second. I'm just going to show you right now what gizmos are and how you can work with them, and then we'll take it from there. If you can let me know if now you can see my gizmo screen. Perfect, thank you. I'm going to log into my account and I'm going to show you how we can work with simulations to support our social emotional learning and how we can support as well STEM, of course. So when you log into your account, what we will do is we will go in here and I'm just going to give you a quick tour. So what they are is, remember, they're simulations that are going to support your inquiry. They're already set up to be fully inquiry-based, and they're already set up to be STEM. So let's explore them. How can we find them? We can find them by academic standard, by textbook, by grade and topic. So if I were to look overall by grade and topic, just for time purposes, I'm just going to give you a quick overview. You can see here how we've had them divided, but also by textbook. So if you, for example, are teaching with this book here, and you're teaching a math with course 6, you can see here all of the different sections of the book covered. And if you're looking more by general sections of math and science, physical science, etc., You can look at them here and just click on it and look them up. Let's say we want to talk about human impacts. And then we can go in and see all of the different ways we can look at these concepts. I'm going to just use a keyword here for time purposes, and we're going to just start showing you simulations. So I thought we could talk about ecosystems today. So when I put the ecosystem, you will see I will have a number of solutions that I can use, a number of simulations I can use in order to explain this concept. Remember, the idea is to connect it back to students' interests, students' backgrounds, involving students, empowering students. This is where simulations are going to be great for you to be able to see. So I'm going to choose this one, which is food chain. And as you can see here, we can look at ecosystems in general. I'll let you know what a STEM case is in just a second. But we can look at prairies, about how GMOs affect the environment, forest ecosystem, a pond ecosystem, a rabbit population by season. Another STEM case here, our food gizmo that I want to share with you in a second, and also about coral reefs. So these are all the simulations that specifically relate to what we call an ecosystem. And in here, I'm going to take a simpler one that is called food chain. What's great about these simulations that are called gizmos is that they're always set up the same way, and you've got all of the materials set up for you. An inquiry research document here, the answer key, your teacher guide, and a vocabulary sheet, because it's very important for you to make sure that your students understand all the words that we're going to be studying throughout this particular lesson. So the first thing to support student understanding and students' engagement is to make sure that the vocabulary we use is a vocabulary we understand. So we have consumer, we have ecosystem, we have energy pyramid. These are the minimum pieces that they should know. You can always add. These documents are all modifiable. They can see they're in, you can open them in MS Words and modify them. My recommendation generally when I do these activities is I open the vocabulary words and I delete all of the definitions. I let my students put in their own definitions for me to find out what they know, what they don't know, how they explain things. This is what's going to help me become more differentiated in my approach. If they don't know what a consumer is, what an ecosystem is, if they can't define it, it tells me a lot about how I'm going to approach that lesson. And I will not know today, even less, what losses or what areas did they not have a chance to explore in the last couple of years if I get a student. So it's important for me to start at the vocabulary level. I'm going to show you the simulation and I'll show you the rest of the material. And this is what's great about the simulations. No one can break the gizmo, right? You can just do whatever you do. You get something wrong, you start again. And that's going to help a lot with building resilience in all your students. So in here, we've got an ecosystem, a very simplified ecosystem, a food chain. We've got some grass, we've got some rabbit, we've got some snakes, and we've got some hawks. In our ecosystem here, in our simplified system, the hawks eat the snakes eat the rabbit eat the grass, the hawks can't eat the rabbits. It's just, again, modeling has a reason for it. And we have a whole conversation about why modeling is so important. So what we're going to do here is we're going to look at the data in multiple formats, in a table, in a bar chart, and in a graph. The reason why we offer these different formats is, remember, your students are very different. Each one may be more comfortable reading a graph, and some may be more comfortable reading a bar chart. So offering them multiple ways of looking at data, and some will be for them a table, it's very important for them to understand those concepts. And this you'll see across all of our simulations. So as you can see here, I'm collecting data. I happen to start off in equilibrium. I can export this data. We can see that over here, we've got all the data represented in these different formats. And in this graph, this is how we represent equilibrium. Same with here. Of course, it's not 100% always here, because again, in nature, we don't have the same number of snakes eating the same number of rabbits every day, etc., etc. So we take into consideration a small variation always around that equilibrium. And let's say, for example, there's a big fire. We are having wildfires, and so we were talking earlier with some of you. We're having some wildfires, so some of the grass is gonna go away, right? So let's remove some of the grass. After there is a wildfire and some of the grass is lost, what is going to happen to our rabbits, snakes, and hawks? This is when we engage our students to go in and see how you can figure out, what's going to happen. If our students make the wrong prediction, it's not the end of the world. We'll just change our prediction, correct? So we're just gonna see once they make the predictions, once they tell us why they think, most of them will say, well, there's not enough grass left, so which means that rabbits are not gonna have enough food, which means they're gonna die off. If there aren't enough rabbits, snake population is gonna decrease. Same for the hawk population. And then we may ask them, okay, and what's gonna happen in 6 months? Is an equilibrium going to be reestablished? Why or why not? And so now students have to go back in and think about it. Well, think about it. And then once they do, we run the simulation and we see what happens. Watch that. First, our grass, of course, is gone because we've got here. Then it started to grow again. It starts to grow. It starts to grow to even the higher quantity of grass than we had before. Same for our rabbits because they are going to follow. Now there's a lot more food for them. And then after a while, we go back to an equilibrium, right? So it's a great way for allowing students to analyze. If they have the wrong hypotheses, that's okay. They can start again, they can restart it. We can give them another possibility to think about that. And so now we can come in with some of our presets and say, well, we saw that we made a change in our environment and it was able to recover. What if we were to remove all of the snakes? What do you think would happen? It's a preset that I have here. What's going to happen to our ecosystem? And then we allow students to go and explore. And when we run the simulation, after the hypothesis and explanation as to why, we see that when we remove our snakes from our environment, in less than 12 months, our whole ecosystem collapses. That's very scary when you think about it. How important are snakes in our environment? What if we were to remove, what other ways could we have a collapsed system? So another example of a collapsed system. What do you think I did in the beginning to get there? So I've created the lab here, gotten the results, I've saved it in my preset, and now I'm asking my students to look at this and say, what were the initial conditions that caused this collapse of the ecosystem? And then you can see here that what happened is in reality, if you look at this graph, look, of course, at the bar chart, if our students are unable to see it. What do you think? We actually removed the rabbits. Sorry, we removed the grass. There's no grain line, right? So this is where we ended the result. You can also look at the table and we can see here that the grass was removed and this is how it ran. Of course, we can run it again and get the results. What would happen if I were to remove the hawks? I removed some grass. I know I can remove the snakes. What happens? I remove my grass. What happens completely? What happens if I were to remove my hawks? Would anybody want to tell me what you think is going to happen? Is the ecosystem going to collapse? Do you know? Would you like us to try and see what happens? Most of the sessions I've been in, my teachers say that they think it's going to collapse very quickly. But look at this. We've gotten to a new equilibrium after a while. So it's interesting. What happens if the top of the pyramid disappears? versus the other parts of the pyramid. What can you say? The top of the pyramid disappears, the rest of the environment is going to survive. It's going to just create a new equilibrium. And we can run this for years if you'd like. But if the parts of the ecosystem, other than the top one, below the top one collapse, what we see is that the whole ecosystem collapse. So that tells you about the place of humans in nature, how important it is to take care of the environment, why we don't want to, and we haven't even introduced diseases, etc., etc. And so we are allowing for that thinking to happen, right? We can even create situations where we get a mystery preset like that. And as you can see, I've created a preset, I've saved it, and I said, my students, again, now a little bit more complicated. What do you think happened here? How did we end up there? What were the initial conditions? And if I were to run this for another 12 months, what would happen in 12 months? So you're really back and making sure that students understand concept, they're playing with the material, they're testing it, they're creating their hypotheses, they're developing those contents, but they're also developing their skills. And when you're working with simulations like this, you want to provide your students with some guidance. And so that's where we have guided worksheets, which you can modify. I'm opening them in PDF, but you can open them in Word or Google. If I open them in PDF, what do you see? You see the student exploration sheet. And again, you can modify these any way you want. You can delete parts of it. You can use it any way that fits your needs. So you've got your vocabulary here that I talked about earlier, some prior knowledge questions. So one of the ways that we can support social emotional learning is to connect content to students' backgrounds and have them connect to the real world around them that way. If they have never seen a snake, it's hard for them to imagine what a snake is, or if they've never heard of hawks. So it's good to connect the knowledge, the content to some their own knowledge. And one of the ways we can do that is by asking prior knowledge questions. So every simulation will have this document here with prior knowledge questions. You can ask them as a whole group to determine what your class knows and doesn't know. Or you can ask them individually and start setting up groups, right? That's how you can set up groups to help students as well and differentiate your learning. As you can see, everything is an inquiry in here. One of the inquiry here is, how do predators and prey populations affect one another? That's your inquiry questions. If I were to ask you this, how would you go around answering this question? Well, again, we've got a guided inquiry here. So you can say, okay, first observe, then form your hypotheses, then make a prediction. So we're guiding your students to it. Your teachers don't have to come up with it. It's all created there. And then you can modify them. You can add lines, you can remove information, you can ask them more questions. And there are multiple activities we recommend, and those activities are scaffolded. So activity A is going to be the simplest, activity B becomes a little bit more complex, and so on and so forth. So they are all here, and each of the activities is going to be an inquiry question related to the topic that we're teaching, right? In that same manner, if we look, we have a teacher guide, and the teacher guide is going to be basically your lesson plan in there. So you're going to have your learning objectives, again, your vocabulary, your multiple activities, but also how to create a lesson sequence, your scope and sequence, right? What to do before, what questions to ask your students, what questions to discuss with your students. You don't have to do it. It's just a recommended one. Then you're having other simulations you can do, other activities you can do before running the simulation. And then you've got discussion questions. This is where we're bringing in the critical thinking. This is where we're bringing in all of these ideas we've covered so far in terms of STEM. And we relate this information to a real world problem, which will allow students to connect to the material and connect to the world around them. And that will make their emotional well-being way better than some document about some information never heard of before. And then, of course, we want to take their knowledge and tell them, well, this is how we applied the knowledge, application of the knowledge right here. And then after that, We're going to give them other resources. So if you're interested in web resources that we've vetted, we made sure that they were extremely correct, and the information in them is you can trust it. We've got for each of the 475 plus simulations, web resources that we recommend, and other simulations that you can access, and other simulations that are going to take that content and take it deeper. Like in here, we're going to go into like a coral reef, where it's a little bit more complex, because now we've got so many different, earlier we had like remove or add some of the grass, or give a disease to your grass or your different part of the ecosystem. You're bringing in ocean conditions that are complex. You're bringing in land use. You're bringing in fishing. You can make a combination of all of the disease and invasive species, and you're working again with the data in the same manner. So that's one example of a gizmo, and we've done one. As I said, there are almost 500 right now. There's over 475. I want to show you another gizmo very quickly, and it is all about STEM cases. So if you look about a STEM case, and that's one is another you can understand and develop STEM in our students. Those STEM cases really are so amazing because they actually work with the students' background, but also it works with bringing in students as a STEM worker. So you get them to be toxicologists, like pediatricians. They can take on the role of medical toxicologists, like here in cell respiration, physician assistant, national park ranger. And what you're doing is you're solving a whole problem. Like here, you're a vet technician. Let's look at this as a vet technician. As a vet technician, you're working in a lab and they bring you a dog that's been eating, but yet losing weight. So we are going to cover certain topics with it. We're going to cover, in biology, we're going to cover enzymes and amino acids and reactants. All of these different topics are going to be included in that story. And while the student is working on it,
welcome to Explore.
What we're going to see is he's going to have to learn the content, do tests on the dog, all virtually, then get the results of why this dog is losing weight, understand what's happening at the enzymatic level, understand the different reactions, learn about metabolisms. All the while, we're collecting data on the student on how they're learning and what their answers are. Then they go back to the lab, they test everything, all of course, virtually. They get the results, they decide on what treatment to give the dog. Once they've gotten the treatment decided, they try it on the dog, and then they see the results. Of course, if the treatment they chose is incorrect, they can go back and change that. And what's great about it is at the end, you'll get a case report. They'll also write up a case report, and you'll be able to see all of the data that we collected while students are working on this. So I'm going to show you what the data looks like, because in my opinion, this is a great way for you to see how you can develop your students' skills in STEM as well. So this is the case here. Here are some of my students in my class. And we've got a heat map that comes with it. So it tells you, of course, green, they got it right. Red, clearly they got it wrong. Yellow means that they've got it right, but it took a couple of tries. And then we can see how your students perform. The blue here means that it's a prompt where they had to write, and it was a prompt that you had to write. You had to correct it, and it comes with a rubric. And so in this case, they discover what kind of treatment they have to do for this dog. This is one of the multiple STEM cases that we have. And the last one here is what we're rewriting the case summary report. And you can see in the case summary report all of the different questions, and you can, of course, comment back as well to the students. What I think is interesting is seeing situations like this where almost my entire class had a difficulty with question 2, which means I can intervene with question 2 and respond and see what needs to be done. Now, this goes a bit further. It also shows you what skills students have developed or need developing, which STEM skills. And we're talking about core concepts, data analysis, data interpretation, hypothesis reasoning, prediction, and communication of findings. So you can really dig in and see where students are needing support and how you can level and power them up so that they can reach the next level of their learning. So it gives you a much deeper look into the student's mind and where they are with these concepts and how they can move. And then we can, of course, look at them through time, which means as time passes, as we go from one STEM case to the other, we can see how those particular skills improve. So if we've got a student that we're interested only in their core concept, maybe now we want to focus on data analysis. This student here started off with having lots of difficulty with data analysis. And as he moved, he developed those skills. And we can get this data for students and show progress in their STEM skills, as well as in their concepts, in the core concepts. So where do they have the core concept? Where do they not have the core concept? Where they need support, etc. There's a lot more to cover with Git. I just want to take a moment to share those with you. And because of time, I'm going to go back quickly to my presentation. And as I said, like, why are they so great? Is because they're really ideal now, as you can see, for online, in-class, blended learning, distance learning. They really are designed for inquiry and interactivity. There's no question about it. And you can see how it helps you manipulate key variables, independent and independent variables, and see what happens. Students are going to be very much encouraged to ask what if questions and create their hypotheses, test them out in the environment online. They are not going to be so much afraid of making an error, right? Because they can reset it. So it develops that resiliency we talked about. It develops their collaborative skills as they work with different students to care about other students and support their group. It's going to help you as teachers to implement inquiry-rich instruction with easily differentiated activities. We really have STEM case studies that are going to support that as well, and have them see the whole process in one step. So that's what I wanted to share with you. I hope that we have had a good couple of minutes with you today, and thank you so much. If you've got any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. And also, I wanted to throw in one more poll, the last one, so that if we are to meet next time, I would like to hear a little bit more about what you'd like to talk about. And if you could send the last poll to you. Thank you so much. And for all of us, thank you so much for being here. And for all of you here, if you've got questions, I'm happy to answer questions you'd like us to cover. And if you've got other ideas, please reach out to us. We've got a very large series of webinars. We can support all of your needs and give you different ideas in different ways and show you how other schools around the world are approaching this idea of being ready for the future.
Thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you, Susan, for the informative session. We hope you all enjoyed the session which Susan has conducted. Thank you so much.
So much. Thank you. Thank you.